introduce Ron, I'm going to bring up my good friend Jan Fisher, the Executive Director of Nonprofit Westchester.
Thank you, Tom. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. As Tom said, I am the Executive Director of Nonprofit Westchester. We are Westchester's only membership organization solely dedicated to advancing the needs and the interests of Westchester's fierce nonprofit organizations, the people who serve, and the nonprofit workforce. It's been really amazing to be part of this summit, part of the planning committee, and I thank Tom and Faith and the rest of the committee for doing this and for gathering us all together. We are 300 members strong, and one of the most important things to Nonprofit Westchester is strengthening the sector to be all it can be. And with that, on April 7th, I want to tell you all about another event that will be happening here, and it's charting an anti-racist path forward in the nonprofit sector. Based on almost 3 years of events and research, this will be an extremely important event, and I invite you all to attend. But now, to introduce my friend and colleague, Ron Abad. I met Rod virtually, and we connected immediately, if that's possible, and he's been an amazing friend and colleague and board member. So I'm going to just read some of his bio. I don't usually like to read, but it's important that I get this right. As a dynamic leader with a mission and passion to strengthen individuals and families and move them from poverty to self-sufficiency, Ron Abad has nearly 25 years of executive leadership experience in government and nonprofit organizations in the field of homeless shelters, supportive housing, and community-based health care. Ron is the Chief Executive Officer of Community Housing Innovations. For over 30 years, this organization has served tens of thousands of homeless to low moderate income families in Westchester, Long Island, and the Hudson Valley. Each night, they provide emergency housing to over 1,000 homeless individuals and families. And they do so much more, so I encourage you to go to their website and learn more about them. Ron holds a Juris Doctorate from Boston College Law School and a bachelor's degree from Howard University, and as a continuous learner, numerous other executive certificate programs. He is a busy man. He serves on his church in White Plains, on the board of directors of the William George Agency, one of the state's oldest and largest organizations providing residential care for at-risk youth and young adults. We grabbed Ron up quickly at Nonprofit Westchester, recognizing how awesome he is, so he has joined our board and has already had a great impact. He serves on the Strategic Council of the Human Services Council and the Suppliers and Service Providers Advisory Council of the Building and Realtors Institute. Ron is relatively new to Westchester, and we are excited that we now benefit from his expertise, experience, and thoughtful leadership in our county. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you so much. Let's give Jan a hand. Outstanding leader of not-for-profit Westchester. You know, it's so easy to just go into my pocket and pick up my keys. It is so easy to go home tonight after a hard day of work, 10, 15-minute TED Talk, and just go home and just say, I'm home. It is so easy. But it is disheartening that we know that there can be a 62-year-old man, a veteran, who has served our country, and he's never had his own keys. He's never owned his own keys to his own apartment. 62 years old, served our country, living in the streets, living in shelters, living in hospitals, psychiatric hospitals, for 20, 30, 40, even sometimes 50 years, and not have his own keys. It is disheartening when there's a mother living with her grandmother and her 4 kids, a single mother, 4 kids, and not one of the kids has had their own bed. It is disheartening that on a Thursday night, they can be placed somewhere, and by Monday morning, they're somewhere else, not have their own keys to their own home. It is disheartening when they're a couple, working couple, married, working for years, oftentimes on the front line in our organizations, and they are either homeless or at risk of homelessness. And they build their infrastructure, the front line for our not-for-profit organizations. And they've done the right thing, and they can't even own their own home. Why do we collaborate? Why do we advocate? Why do we fight against homelessness? Why do we fight for more affordable, quality, safe, supportive housing? Why do we do these things? Just to have a job? Just to be involved? We hear affordable housing, homelessness, not in my backyard, ADOs. These are the topics we hear about very often, very well covered all throughout. But this is nothing new. Affordable housing is it's not a new issue. Homelessness is not a new issue. It's existed all throughout the world, but particularly in our country for decades, even centuries. And let me give you a little history. There have been laws and legacies and practices. Folks, remember that. Laws, legacies, and practices that have either restricted, denied, rejected people from the opportunity to own their own home. And it's not limited to any one population. Going back to the abolition movement and slavery, it was about property and property ownership and home ownership and building wealth for one population while dehumanizing another population. Early in the 1900s, there were Irish and Jews and Germans and Italians from all backgrounds, many of them immigrants, that came to our country living in horrid, squalid conditions, and that led to the tenement movement. There were Latinos, whether in the South or in the West, all throughout our country, who were denied housing just because of their backgrounds. There were Asians who were displaced, came here, built railroads throughout our country, and displaced and couldn't even have a home of their own. There were the Native Americans who lived here for hundreds and thousands of years and now are reserved to live in reservation land. When you hear about affordable housing today and homelessness, this isn't just for Westchester. This is part of our country's legacy. It's an international issue. It's been like that for thousands of years. It's something, that we all struggle with. But what did it take? Every movement, the abolition movement, the tenement movement, fights for more rights for Native Americans, fights for more rights for Latinos, fights for more. What did it take? It took the collaboration and advocacy of mission-minded and purpose-driven organizations for hundreds and hundreds of years to come together and collaborate. Why? Because of the basic fundamental need to have a home of your own. How many of you believe that to have shelter over your head, a roof over your head, is basic and fundamental? Raise your hand. How many of you have left tonight? If you left tonight and there were a crisis, God forbid, and you didn't have your own home and house, you would be in crisis. You would be in crisis. Well, folks, let me tell you like this, and that all of us know, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in our country, particularly here in Westchester County, who live in crisis every day of their lives. Yes, you should clap. My story is part of that. Born from a black Puerto Rican family in the South Bronx, first generation mainland, U.S. mainland. If it wasn't for the support and collaboration and advocacy, I perhaps wouldn't be on this stage. But there were opposition, there were zoning laws, there were deed restrictions, there were barriers, laws, legacy, and practices. There were opposition groups. By law, in law, structured in law to prohibit certain populations from having a home of their own. We fight against homelessness because when you're homeless over a period of time, despite the inner resilience that many people have and the inner fight they have, over time it pulls on your dignity. The 62-year-old gentleman that I mentioned, it pulls on his dignity because he says, I have served my country, but now I live in the streets. The mother and grandmother who are surviving strong, I'm trying to do my best to raise my children, but now I live in a homeless shelter that I can get kicked out by Monday and I don't have keys of my own. The couple that are struggling just to own a home of their own, just to save money for years and years to do the right thing so they have their own home, the dignity of their own home. Is powerful, but they get denied and rejected because of zoning laws or laws that prohibit home ownership in certain areas. The suburbs, folks, if you don't know, Long Island and Westchester, many of the suburbs were deliberately planned and designed to prohibit certain populations from the cities to moving out to those lands. Did everyone know that? And what ended up happening is that some people benefited with increased wealth and some people stayed in poverty. However, all throughout the last 200-300 years, there were various not-for-profit, mission-minded, purpose-driven organizations, from Bowery Mission to Salvation Army to the American Red Cross, right, to Volunteers of America, to YMCA and YWCA, that have been advocating to break those laws, legacies, and practices. Why? To preserve the dignity to own your own home. This is why we do this. While I was growing up in the South Bronx, immediately as a young man, I started observing those differences. And I was as gritty and hardworking, as any other young boy anywhere, in any population. But I knew very quickly I did not have the same opportunities that someone who gave the same drive and effort I was, who just happened to live in a different neighborhood, can get. So over time, it took grit and hard work, right? It took perseverance and commitment, but it took support. It took the support like organizations like ours to support my family and to support my neighbors' families so I can move through. Are we all in agreement? Are we all in agreement? So these organizations that collaborated, they're mission-minded and purpose-driven, they collaborated and fought against those zoning laws, those deed restrictions, those things that prohibited. And over time, they grew and they served the people. Young lady Christina mentioned about the storytelling. It is about storytelling, but it is about the stories of people's lives. This is real work. This is what we do. And we cannot do it alone. We collaborate, working together to jointly remove the barriers that lead people to homelessness. And we fight for more affordable housing. What is affordable housing? Affordable housing is exactly what it says, that it's affordable. And if your income and you spend 60, 70, 80% of your income just to pay your rent, that's not affordable. Over time, you will sink and make decisions between paying your rent and eating nutritious food. You will make decisions about investing in your children and having a roof over your head. You will make decisions about extracurricular activities like ballet and Little League and Boy Scouts just to pay your rent. You will compromise the best that you have just to pay your rent. The lack of affordable housing, the lack of supportive housing, or lack of fair housing and decent housing remains a cause that we should fight about. Why? Because everyone has the right, the dignity to own their own keys, to have a home of their own. The impact of not having a home is tremendous For children, it breaks their inner strength. So for many of our kids, by the time they become 10, that inner natural drive to excel, to grow, to be creative, it starts to get sapped. For a mother, a father, the inner desire to advance and to be greater than your parents were is sapped. So it behooves organizations like us to be much more supportive, to really be collaborative, and to work together to build them. I'm doing a time check. Am I at 10 minutes or 15 minutes? I'm good? I'm good on time? So now, who are the we? We are the BRIs. We are the Feeding Westchester. We are the YWCA. We're the banks, the TD banks, right? The PCSP, that we need you to be creative in your financing. We're the government organizations, Westchester County, all the cities and municipalities, that we need you to invest in our communities. We're the advocacy organizations, MPW, et cetera, that we need you to continue to advocate on this, whether at the state, city, or federal level. Everyone needs to be involved in advocating for people. It's not about homeless people. There are no homeless people. There are people who are struggling with homelessness. Do folks understand? There are no homeless people. There are people who are struggling with homelessness. And any of us, no matter what our income or security, can become homeless. One crisis, one illness, one devastation of your town can make you homeless overnight. Do we all agree? So that should sensitize those of us who are in the community to continue to advocate. But this is what's the result. The result is now that 62-year-old man who was a veteran, because of CHIs and West Hab, has keys to his house. Because of support programs like Feeding Westchester, so there's no food insecurity for that elderly gentleman, can live decently in his house. Let's clap. Because of Child Care of Westchester, or WCA, the children have great support, correct? And because of Westchester Arts, the kids can be involved in arts and culture for themselves, right? This is what this is about. The mother with the 4 children, now the kids have their own beds. Because organizations like mine and other organizations now, the impact that 10-year-old boy now, when he's 11, and he runs into his apartment or his house, and now he has a bed, that would impact him for generations and generations. Don't ever forget that. And the power of that couple that have been saving for 20 years, 30 years, and they work in our organizations, they run our organizations. And now, because of home ownership programs, eviction and foreclosure programs, they will not be evicted, and they will have the right to own the keys to their own home. And all of you who live much, much better will understand the power, the value of collaborating and advocating for someone to have the keys to their own home. Thank you.